The Dallas Cowboys cornerback room is a little bit of a mess right now, but what will it look like by the time we get to week one? We'll discuss that and more next.
You are Locked On Cowboys, your daily Dallas Cowboys podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back to the Locked On Cowboys podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. We'd like to thank you for making us your first listen of the day. Today's episode is brought to you by Monarch Money. Take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use code LOCKEDONNFL at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. Welcome back. I am your host, Marcus Mosher. You can follow me on Twitter at Marcus_Mosher. Joining me today, as always, is Landon McCool. You can follow him on Twitter at McCoolBCB. And on today's show, we're continuing our training camp preview by looking at the cornerback room, which is in a little bit of disarray. I mean, a little bit, Landon.
I was laughing because you do that Monarch Money read, and honestly, it feels like the Cowboys need Monarch Money just to kind of find where they stashed all these corners on this roster. They're paying all these corners that I think sometimes we just forget about all of them. So, it's definitely a little bit of a hodgepodge of players, and I'm excited to kind of get into it a little bit.
Well, we talked about the corners on the squad show that was out on Thursday. You guys can go check that out. And our guy Stretch Smith actually started playing the MASH theme song, which about sums up this group. But let's start with the guys that we expect to be on the field for week one against the Philadelphia Eagles. Daron Bland, likely in the slot, maybe on the outside. Izzy Mukuamu, likely playing in the slot when Bland is on the outside. And then Kaiir Elam. It's a pretty new group compared to what we saw at this time last year. But what are your thoughts on those guys as the starters?
Yeah, I think right now those are the guys that we feel pretty confident. Knock on wood. Hopefully there's no more injury at that spot that probably are going that we at least we feel like we can rely on to be there for us week one. And I think it's an interesting group. It certainly is very different. I think the coverages that they're going to be deployed in are going to be very different as well. And I think that kind of reflects a little bit in the change kind of in some of the guys that we've gotten. I will say this: it's a very long group, and I mean that physically and literally. The incredibly long arms. Elam comes in another 6'1" plus, 190-pound guy. Mukuamu, if he's playing in the slot, may be the biggest slot corner in the league.
Not only in the league, but I think he'd be the biggest slot corner in NFL history.
Yeah, I think that's probably unless they're counting some linebacker who walked out to cover somebody in the slot. I don't know that there's anyone bigger who's playing full-time slot. I think with Bland, he's a larger corner. I think on the spectrum of things, we just don't necessarily think of him that way because of him playing on this team that is obsessed with big corners. So it's an interesting group. The hope is that Elam can kind of show some of the better play that we saw from him last year, as opposed to obviously some of the stinkers. But I think, Mukuamu is the guy that I keep kind of looking at because he doesn't have a ton of experience starting. We've been begging for him to get more opportunity, and I think this is probably that. But there's certainly a lot of unknown there, and a lot of a lot more increase in defensive snaps that he's going to see this year, potentially than he's seen in the previous years.
We've been kind of championing. We really like Izzy Mukuamu. We really liked Izzy Mukuamu. We've liked him in the preseason. Anytime he's played really well. You remember the playoff game against San Francisco where he started in the slot and performed really well. So we've been waiting for his time to come, and it feels like we're finally there. But I actually want to go to Daron Bland, who, listen, last year was not a great year for Daron Bland. He got hurt in training camp, missed, 12 weeks or something. We thought he was ready to come back. He suffered a setback. And then when he got back, he played well, but not to the level that we saw in 2023. I don't think he had any interceptions, but it's crazy how much faith and hope the Cowboys are putting into Daron Bland right now, because if he struggles at all, and if he's like an average corner, this defense could be in trouble. Like, they need Daron Bland to get back to being a Pro Bowl all-pro corner. And if he does, everything else will fall into place, and it's not going to be a big deal in the cornerback room. But, man, they really need him to play well this season.
I'll push back on that simply because I don't disagree in a lot of ways that they need him to be a good player. I will say this. I do think that the one thing that we can say about this room is that, you know, the floor and the ceiling are just all over the place because 100%. It's just really depending on who's playing. I do think that the Cowboys have insulated themselves a little bit by so heavily investing in pass rush, right?
Yes.
At the very least, you know, I think that's the problem really that they had last year that they, you know, that I think that was hidden is that they were in a boat race between corner and defensive end to see who could have the most injured players all at once. And it really just, you know, hollowed out the pass defense incredibly fast. So I do think that the Cowboys have looked at that situation and said, we're going to solve this problem through numbers. And at the very least, we're not going to get caught with 0 pass rushers and 0 cover corners. So I don't disagree that they're relying on Bland, especially early while other guys get healthy, but they're also insulating that situation by heavily investing in pass rush, moving back to a more zone friendly scheme, which doesn't require as much hard to acquire skill as man coverage. You know, they're helping that situation out as much as they can.
We should also mention Kaiir Elam, who you mentioned at the top. He's had a really good offseason by all accounts. He's been one of their better defensive players in OTAs and mini camps. He's only 24, so it's not like he's this older guy that we kind of already know. Like there were cornerbacks drafted this year that were older than Kaiir Elam. In fact, I think Shavon, Revel, and Elam are pretty close in age. And Elam's played in all these big games, including AFC Championship games, a bunch of primetime games. So I think my expectation, the Cowboys don't need him to play like a first-round pick. They just need him to play like an average corner. And if he can do that, I think the defense is going to be in phenomenal shape.
Yeah, I mean, I think he played pretty well after he got an opportunity to start a little bit. And then, you know, he got into a conference championship game this last year against Patrick Mahomes. And guess what? You know, everybody plays the punching Susan role when you play Patrick Mahomes and you're a cornerback every once in a while. And the other thing, too, is that cornerback is such a high fluctuation position that, you know, sometimes, especially when you're young and early on, you're going to have good days. You're going to have bad days. And it may just go week to week like that. So I do think that the lasting impression that everyone has of Elam is obviously the kind of disaster with Kansas City, but that's not the whole picture of how he even played last year. So, you know, there was some good football that he played last year. And I do think the Cowboys fans shouldn't just write Elam off as like a toast cornerback that isn't going to be anything. You should be able to get starters worthy play out of this guy, hopefully early while you're getting healthy.
Yeah, and a lot of times for these guys that are former first-round picks, they have such high expectations
that's true.
For the teams that draft them, and then they move on to a different situation, and no longer are they treated like a first-round pick, right? They're treated like somebody that's just trying to get on the field. And now if he plays to the level that we saw in the regular season last year, the Cowboys got a heck of a deal because they just stole a starting cornerback for a day 3 pick swap. That's all he has to do for the Cowboys to win this trade in a big way. So I'm really excited to see Elam in Matt Eberflus's defense. I'm excited to see him in training camp. And you can bet that he's probably going to be one of the starting outside corners when the Cowboys play Philadelphia in week 1.
Yeah, absolutely. Even with a strong recovery by one of these guys we'll talk about here in this next segment, you have to imagine that Elam is still going to be one of those starters out there.
All right, let's talk about that MASH unit of cornerbacks. We're not even talking about all the injured guys, but a couple of them, including Trevon Diggs. What is his status? There we go. Pretty good. That's not bad. We'll talk about Trevon Diggs, Shavon, Revel, and some more of the banged up corners going into training camp. This episode is brought to you by Monarch Money. Do you ever wish that managing your money felt easier? With Monarch Money, it can. Whether you're trying to grow your savings or you're planning a big purchase, Monarch puts you in the driver's seat. It's like having your own personal CFO, giving you full visibility and control over your finances. Monarch Money is more than just a budgeting app. It's a complete financial command center. You can track all of your accounts, all of your investments, and your spending in one place. So in addition to managing your money, you're also building your wealth. My family's been using Monarch Money for about 7 months now, and it's unbelievable how much money that we were wasting on stupid stuff like coffee runs or football cards or whatever it may be. We were wasting a lot of money, but now we're actually building our savings and we're creating wealth. Take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use code LOCKEDONNFL at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. That is monarchmoney.com, code LOCKEDONNFL for half off your first year. Welcome back to the Locked On Cowboys podcast. We'd like to thank you for making us your first listen of the day. All right, Landon, we are talking about the Cowboys corners going into training camp, and let's talk about the mash unit. Let's start with Trevon Diggs. He suffered a knee injury late into the year. It was kind of weird. We never really heard exactly what the injury was until like February. It seems like he's making really good progress. We're seeing videos of him running and doing drills. But kind of the timeline all along is that he was going to start on PUP. And then we heard, I think it was Micah Parsons in the offseason say, we get Diggs back by Thanksgiving. When do you think we'll see him back on the field?
Yeah, I mean, I think, Thanksgiving seems like it seems like a good timeline. I think, we there's been some hope that maybe he could get back a little bit sooner than that. And the video that we've seen of him kind of running and doing drills, I saw one of him really just covering a guy, kind of not with pads on or anything, but basically in coverage. So, I mean, he's clearly in a good spot. I do think that, it's going to be interesting to see how the timelines kind of come out of training camp once we see him get there with Britt Brown and they get the chance to examine him. Because that's the other thing about this is that, usually we hear whispers or we hear things of that, and that's all based on the analysis that comes from, Britt Brown working with these guys, but he hasn't been with Britt Brown. So we really don't kind of have any extra insight or any idea where he is other than the videos that we've seen, but none of us are really trained to know what any of that means. So
no.
I think that, we'll learn a lot more. That's going to be, I think, one of the early storylines. The first week of training camp is seeing exactly where some of these folks are in their recovery and getting some better answers. And I think Diggs is at the top of that list because he hasn't specifically been working out with the Cowboys trainers. And we just don't really know much.
And I'm going to say this about Diggs. I think when we see him on the field will probably depend on how the starting corners in like week 1 or 2 hold up. Sure. Because, if they're really struggling, I wouldn't be surprised to see the Cowboys push Diggs out on the field maybe sooner than he's ready. But if they're able to win some of these games and kind of stay afloat, maybe they'll feel more confident giving Diggs more time to ramp up, get into condition before they throw him out on the field. But we'll see.
Do you think here's my question to you. What are the odds you think on him being placed on PUP, week 1, like in
pretty
season
high.
PUP? You think so?
Yeah.
I think it's like 75-25, right?
Yeah, probably. I think so. And honestly, for both parties, I think it makes sense. Now you're not creating unrealistic expectations of keeping them on the roster. You're able to stash a couple more of these guys on your active roster. We get to October, we'll see what kind of conditioning he's in. But yeah, all along, I haven't expected Diggs to be on the field anytime before October. And I think if he is, that's a huge win.
I honestly think the other thing that's really hard to predict right now is I do think, their ability to be patient with the situation also depends on several other injured players' situations. So it's kind of like we're going to get all this information at once and then kind of make a decision on, all right, who's coming back first and how are we going to arrange this?
Well, Shavon Revel, who we'll talk about next, that's a perfect example, right? Because if Shavon Revel, who we had some mixed reports this offseason about his health, but it seems like he's on track, right? I still think there's a chance that I don't think he's going to be on PUP to start the year. I do think he'll be on the active roster. I wouldn't be surprised, Landon, if he's not necessarily playing in week 1 or 2 as they can continue to work on the conditioning, but I would expect Revel to be playing at some point in September.
Yeah, I agree. I think the goal is to avoid in-season PUP. But I think even with that goal, you're probably still not playing him in the first few weeks just to kind of get him acclimated into regular season. It's a lot to all come into at once. Recovering and then coming off the injury list and also being a rookie and then also making a leap from where he is. I mean, it's not a huge leap, but still it's enough. Jumping to the NFL is enough. So I do think that, they're going to see if they have this luxury. And again, it's going to be based on some of these other situations too. If they're going to have the luxury to kind of slow play this situation, if Elam continues to play the way that we've, heard he's playing in the OTAs and mini camps and into training camp, and they start feeling confident about that situation, maybe they slow play all these situations if they can get one of these lesser injured guys. The two ACL guys are really the ones that you worry about the most as far as timeline and like when they're going to be able to get in and get back and play. Some of these other injured guys, it's more just like, okay, we think they'll probably be in training camp, but it's about getting them acclimated.
Well, we should talk about Josh
except for Butler. Yeah.
Well, but he's another guy. He's another guy that tore his ACL late in the year. And it's really unfortunate for Butler because he started to become a full-time player for Dallas. I'm looking at the snap counts right now. 61 snaps against Houston, 61 snaps against the Commanders. And then he gets hurt midway through the Giants game, and he already had played 29 snaps on defense. This was somebody who was earning more and more snaps on defense. Now he's got a torn ACL, and because it happened so late in the year, unless he's just further ahead than Shavon, Revel, and Diggs, which we have not heard that. Maybe that's the case, but we have not heard that yet. I have to imagine he's another guy that's going to be on the PUP list.
Yeah, I mean, just another body you can kind of stash because, again, you can't have enough of these guys, right? And, yeah, again, I think last season, there's obviously a point when kind of where the fate of that season was headed, and you started looking towards the guys that were on the field and still out there fighting to see who could potentially, be who do you want to bring back for next year? Who's like, because a lot of these guys that were playing, they're like, man, I don't ever want to see that guy in a Cowboys uniform, but not Butler, right? Like Butler actually kind of showed you some stuff and looked not only just good, compared to everyone else he was playing with, but good enough to potentially be a part of a rotation or be, at least rosterable. So, when he got hurt, it was really, really upsetting because it felt like, man, I mean, he's already kind of an older player, an older player to break out, let's say. And so I think it was an unfortunate situation, but I do think that, the Cowboys will hold on to him. And I think they will end up using him later in the season because, inevitably there's going to be injuries. And for the Cowboys, it's a good situation. It's nice to kind of have a veteran guy that you feel like there might be a little more upside there with that, you can kind of use as a reserve or come back.
Well, that's the thing is like he's going to be on PUP to start the year.
Yeah.
But you don't necessarily have to bring him off after 4 weeks. Like, I would not be surprised if he's somebody that they keep on PUP until, like, I don't know, Halloween. And then we just kind of see where he's at. And if Diggs isn't ready or Revel is struggling, then you pull him off. But he's somebody that's going to be able to be practicing, getting ready. I think there is a little bit of a window where you can practice and you've got to decide whether you want to bring him up or not. But just somebody that they can stash that's not on their 53-man roster, that's kind of a break glass in case of emergency at corner.
Yeah, but still part of your system, still familiar with what you're doing, still part of the team. So, yeah, I like, it's an unfortunate situation for Butler, but for the Cowboys, it's nice to kind of know that you have reinforcements coming down the road at some point.
All right, so that's 6 cornerbacks that we've mentioned. Only 3 of them are going to practice in Oxnard at all, right? So that's what we're at. We've got to talk about some other young cornerbacks on the Cowboys roster. 2 of which are also dealing with injuries, just to show you how banged up this unit is. Let's talk about Caelan Carson, who somebody that we have not talked about a lot this offseason. What could his role be in year 2? We will get to that next. Welcome back to the Locked On Cowboys podcast. We'd like to thank you for making us your first listen of the day. For your second listen, check out the Locked On NFL Scouting Show. As training camps get closer and moves are being made, hosts Kyle Krabs and Joe Marino will make you the most informed NFL fan this offseason. Find Locked On NFL Scouting on YouTube or wherever you listen to your podcasts. All right, let's talk about some young players at the bottom of the Cowboys roster. Let's start with Caelan Carson, who started week 1 last year as a 5th-round pick for the Cowboys. Then he got banged up, lost a little bit of his confidence, had a shoulder injury, and now I have no idea how he fits into the current roster.
Yeah, a guy that got drafted, another one of these guys like Leofau, right, we talked about the other day, that got drafted by this previous administration, Zimmer, that's gone now, and they're kind of flipping back to closer to the style of defense that they played previous to Zimmer, right? So these guys specifically are kind of in no man's land. And I think, I mean, Carson still meets a lot of the prerequisites the Cowboys have for their corners. He's still a big guy. I think that's not going to be an issue for him. And here's the thing is that I think one of the things we did see from him, I thought he played really well versus Cleveland week 1.
Mm-hmm.
He really, really struggled versus New Orleans. I mean, I think it was about the speed, specifically. I think he was on Shaheed a lot, and I think this was still before Shaheed got hurt, and so he really struggled, against that.
Yeah,
and then Baltimore had another really good game, and then unfortunately got injured. And then when he got back from the injury, he just never was quite the same player. I mean,
he didn't have the same confidence.
I mean, look, that was the crazy thing about him, is that he had all this confidence, and he was a rookie 5th round pick, and then ultimately get the injury, and it's like, man, it's just not quite the same, and reality starts to hit you a little bit. So now you think he's got to come in here, and he's really got to have a really great offseason. But unfortunately, he's had this shoulder situation. So it's just, we have no kind of clue exactly where he is in his development. We're not really sure where he is in his injury. We're not really sure, where he fits in like the scheme of what they're trying to do. So there's just a lot of questions specifically around a guy that I think, we wouldn't be talking about because he's a 5th round pick if he hadn't shown us so much during training camp, and then had at least 2 full games of solid play on the field in his NFL rookie season. So an interesting guy.
Yeah, because I mean, would it shock you if he was one of the starting corners for the Cowboys in week 1?
No.
Like if they just decide, hey, Carson and Elam are our outside corners and Bland's our slot corner in our nickel, that wouldn't shock me at all. But I also won't be surprised if he continues, maybe the shoulder is still an issue and he falls down the depth chart and you start seeing guys like Keelan Hall and Andrew Booth jump him, and all of a sudden we're wondering what happened to that guy that we saw in week 1 last year.
Well, I think that one of the things that really set him apart from some of the players last year is his physicality. I mean, he was a very physical football. He was a hard tackler. Maybe that's part of the reason he got that shoulder injury. But I worry about the fact that he is coming off a shoulder injury. Is he still going to be the same kind of physical player? Because honestly, at the time, it was what was keeping him on the field. I mean, he wasn't necessarily great in coverage, but he was certainly physical enough that he made his presence felt, and he was not quite making plays, but on the precipice of becoming a guy that you felt like could put himself in a position to do something.
All right, 2 other corners that we need to mention: Andrew Booth, Keelan Hall. Booth played a little bit down the stretch last year. You might remember him from that game against Philadelphia where Kenny Pickett threw the ball all over them. That was Andrew Booth's fault. Keelan Hall played 1 snap last year, but he was very, very good in the preseason. I would be shocked if either of these guys made the 53-man roster. But then again, think about all of the injuries ahead of them. Maybe one of them has to make it if they don't go out and sign a veteran corner.
Yeah, I mean, I think Hall to me is one of the guys that has a chance just simply because of numbers and the position he specifically plays. I mean, he is kind of an inside guy. So, I think he potentially could be someone that if he has a great training camp, maybe he doesn't make the roster, but they definitely keep him close, and he's a practice squad guy that they plan on calling up a couple different times. But I just imagine because of the scarcity that they have at the position, and he is kind of the more traditional type, nickel corner type size. I do imagine that he might be a guy that would make it potentially over Booth, because I think we've seen the Booth experiment at this point. I don't really know that we need to. I mean, that's the thing about Booth, is that it's like, you understand why he's hung around, like, because you see it, and then, oh my God, what was that? Like, and it feels like the, oh my God, what was that? Was happening more and more often.
It was happening at least once a game, and you can't have
that. And you can't have that. So I think that there was enough that I understood the tantalizing potential there, but I also have seen enough that I'm done trying to chase that potential.
Do you think the Cowboys need or should add one more veteran cornerback either before camp or a week or 2 into camp?
It reminds me, there's the Always Sunny bit where they keep putting cats in the wall. Yeah, I mean, it's like, yeah, maybe, like, because I do feel like there's just a lot of uncertainty. I think that they're going to be okay at their starting cornerback position probably for the first few weeks if they can get in there healthy with the group they have, but that's still a pretty big if. And then, hopefully they get healthier as the season goes on in some form or fashion, or at least the shifting sands happen and it starts folding over each other, right? So I wouldn't be shocked if they added one more person if they became available. But I do think that, again, like every other position here, they're definitely at a spot right now where they want to see what they've got in training camp before they're making any moves.
It's just crazy how much better I would feel about the position if they had a 1-year rental. Name your 1-year rental. Mike Hilton, if you wanted a slot guy, Russell Douglas, you want to bring back Stephon Gilmore. Like, it doesn't matter. Somebody that can just cover your bases for the first 2 months of the season. So that way Diggs isn't rushed back. And that way Revel can kind of get eased into the starting lineup or onto the field. And Josh Butler maybe will be ready, by Halloween. I would just feel so much better about the group if they just had one more guy that you could throw out there and you didn't feel awful about.
Won't be shocked if they end up making that call sometime in mid-August at all.
Yeah. It feels like I think you're right. I think they want to get through the first 2 or 3 weeks of practice, see how it goes. And then there's going to be corners available. Like, I'm not worried about that. There's going to be options available. We'll just see if the Cowboys actually call one of them up. All right, that is it for today's show. We want to thank you for making Locked On Cowboys your first listen every single day. Go check out the channel on YouTube. Download the podcast wherever you get your podcasts. We are free and available on all platforms. Follow Landon on Twitter at McCoolBCB. I'm at Marcus _Mosher. Have a great weekend, and we'll see you right back here on Monday.